I'm at Odaria in California. Everything's fine here. Got a beautiful day. Of course, I had a disconcerting week or so ago, which caused me to miss the last call and was hospitalized. But it seems that the net result of that is that prior to that, just prior to that, I had a tooth extraction, and apparently there's some connection between that and the condition that I was hospitalized for, rather than the condition being a result of an unhealthy lifestyle or aging and so forth. So I'm in good health. And Gurnisht is taking very good care of me, Gurnisht and Vrindaranya, with diet and exercise and so forth. So everything's good on that front. And we were quite busy with the publishing, but we got interrupted by these recent health events of mine, plus the virus, of course, that's had us busy in different ways to secure ourselves for a longer term here, for example, at Odaria, which is a pretty nice place to be kind of self-quarantined, if you will. So that publishing kind of got put on the back burner. We actually published Oh My Friend in a Kindle version and in a printed version on Amazon, but there was some slight, a couple of things that could be improved on it, the way they did the margins. And so we were in the process of resubmitting it. It's a print on demand from Amazon.com. So that's easy enough to do, but we haven't got around to it. So, we're going forward with all of my books in that way to have them available on Amazon through print on demand and also Kindle version. The print on demand is nice because for the most part, it can be shipped out locally in Europe or in other, wherever Amazon is available. And then my book, Circle of Friends, is also progressing. I decided to write another chapter. I have two appendixes to write, and a few other things like a forward, introduction, and I'm just starting to go through the book also for editing. So we're active on that front, and so that's a little bit what's been going on. So why don't we go and turn to the questions?
Yeah. So Eric, you're going to go first. This is Eric's first time on the call, and he's very happy to be here. He has a question, and I'm going to unmute you, or you can see. I will unmute you. So go ahead, Eric.
Is that Eric?
Hare Krishna, Dandavats Maharaj. It's nice to hear you're out of the hospital and in good health. Okay, so I guess one question that I've been having for a while that's kind of been a sort of big obstacle to the development of my Shraddha is how we're to understand certain statements from the Bhagavatam and other Vedic texts regarding human antiquity and things like that, like events of the previous yugas, because and at least in relation to modern archaeological findings, because from my understanding, Srila Prabhupada at least kind of was on the side of we should take these statements in the Bhagavatam about human antiquity as, literal historical fact. And I think that there's definitely credence that there's evidence that seems to be pointing in that direction, especially with like modern findings about like certain parts of Dwarka that, had sunk into the ocean, or one devotee I know from the Midwest had done like a research about like certain events in the Bhagavatam corresponded to certain like very big prehistoric like mass extinctions and things like that. And So there has been some things that have strengthened my faith in regards to this, but I guess as compared to, say, for example, certain statements in the Bhagavatam about the, uh, Krishna's abode, or certain things that are beyond our, perception, that we kind of have to take those on the, uh, statements of a higher authority like the Bhagavatam. But with regards to things that exist within our like perception within the material world, like history or archaeology, I guess, I'm just wondering, do you have any resources in understanding this a bit better? Because I'm aware of like Michael Cremo and some of the things he's written and said about it, but I guess I just want to be pointed in the right direction so I can get my understanding of like ancient history as according to the Vaishnav tradition squared away. So
I understand your question. Good question. Thank you. First, I'd like to begin by saying that those things that are beyond our immediate experience that you referred to in the context of your question, that you said we have to take on faith, such as Krishna's abode and so forth. I think that, first of all, we have to look at those things in terms of the metaphysic of the Bhagavatam, the way in which it looks at the nature of nature of reality, and in a term that is achintya beta beta. So there's an immanence and transcendence. We have a pan-entheistic perspective, the world in God, which places God also beyond the world at the same time. And when you look at that metaphysic worldview, philosophical, theological perspective, the implication of that is that in transcendence and ultimate reality, there's an interaction between ourselves as units of consciousness and Krishna as the source of consciousness. And that interaction is what constitutes love. Love is reciprocal dealings and so forth. So it's a worldview in which love is supreme, if you will, and it's well reasoned and whatnot. And if we're disposed towards faith in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, then understanding this kind of ground tattva, you have to have a lila, you have to have an abode, you have to have a rational, super subjective realm. We're units of the subjective realm ourselves, and that realm is also subjective. But the subjective here is not something less than the objective. The objective is less than the subjective. Being contained within it and coming out of it for a period, it's like the smoke of the fire, where the sparks of, and the heat and the light is the internal energy, and Krishna's the fire itself. So the objective world, where we're grounded in our illusion, if you will, which then becomes the place in which everything has to be verified, and so forth. That's a mistaken idea. We're in the smoke, so to speak. And so to try to verify the super subjective meditative realm, and what I'm saying is, when I say it's projective, I don't mean to say something less, something more. So like to control your mind is more than not having control. And what will come out of it, what will be experienced, is something more and more profound. So then to verify that super subjective realm, objectively speaking, which we tend to want to do, if you will, because of our orientation, is a difficult task but sometimes we try to do that a little bit to help people have faith because they're so grounded, for example, in that. So the idea that you mentioned, for example, there's some archaeological evidence that there was a great fort off the coast of Dwarka, or that there's a bridge underneath the water from India to Lanka. It was Hanuman's bridge, and so on and so forth. You can try to objectively verify this entire subjective meditative realm and perspective that the texts are writing from. For example, the Bhagavatam is said to be spoken in the Samadhi Bhasha. Bhasha means language, the language of the trance of Vyas. So he's not really looking at Krishna in the way ordinary people would look at Krishna, who, if they saw him, historically speaking, would see him differently, and not with the eyes of love and the third eye, so if you will, and more of Vyasa's samadhi. And so when someone tries to prove historically through archaeological evidence and other type of objective evidence, being pressed to do so as if that's the standard of what's true, I mean, I don't agree with that. If you can't prove it objectively, but third-party objective, evidence, it's not true. I mean, we can't prove that we exist. It's a subjective experience, and our whole existence is, everything we do is based on that. So these are just different categories. Subjective, objective verification. Subjective verification has been diminished and dismissed considerably in the world today since the scientific, revolution and so forth, and the controlled experiment. But it's gone too far with that. Yes, every subjective experience everybody has isn't necessarily true, but the intersubjective experiences of mystics cross-culturally, well, that's something maybe we should, take seriously. And so at any rate, when you try to prove, here Krishna walked here and he did exactly this and so forth, it's going to break down. Even if you could prove that Krishna lived at Dwarka at this time from a modern historical point of view, you couldn't prove that all the miraculous things that Vyas talks about that he did. You're still going to have a historical Krishna. Okay, great, Krishna's real, but then, but he's not doing. You can't prove that he lived at Govardhan Hill, for example, right? You could prove that maybe he lived in the bread region. There was somebody named Vasudev, and and Ram. Their coins with Ram and Vasudev on them, and the Greeks. Some of the Greeks, worship Vasudev, having come to India and so forth. But you can't, let us say, prove that he killed Aghasura and so on. So that kind of verification, if you will, it may be all right for a neophyte in the beginning. It requires that, but one has to go beyond that and realize that the whole objective world is coming out of the subjective world. It's more like like sometimes in modern philosophy and even in neuroscience, they make an argument for the mind just being an epiphenomenon of the brain. So like the steam, coming off the boiling water that has no use, it has no bearing on the water and so forth. Well, the objective world is more like that. It's coming out of the subjective world, and it's there for a little while, and it has no bearing on the ultimately on the subjective world. You don't die. The objective world is transforming and so forth, and you're apart from it. Of course, that's our philosophy, and we give a means by real life to experience that and so forth. So to preface my answer, I wanted to put something like that out there for you. Hope you benefit from that. But otherwise, with regard to the precise, the detail of your question and the antiquity that is posited in the Hindu scriptures and in the Eastern Revelation with regard to human activity on earth and so forth. Well, one thing about the antiquity of the Eastern Revelation is that in one sense has some correspondence with the modern scientific perspective on the age of the world or the planet and so forth, in comparison, for example, to the Western or biblical revelation, where it seems that, you know, whatever it was, I don't know, 6,000 years ago the world started, or 2,000 years ago, I forget what they say, and to take that literally really conflicts very strongly. And sometimes persons, even in the scientific community, acknowledge that, well, the Eastern revelation posits these much longer cycles and periods of time and antiquity. But then when you have human existence in such antiquity, then it's what your question is, starts to contradict with modern archaeological findings and so on and so forth. You have the yugas, for example. Yuga theory. Now, I wrote about the Yuga theory in my book, Sacred Preface, in the, I think in the third chapter of that book. You might want to get that book. It's available at darshanpress.com. It's a commentary on the Mangalacharan of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, but I've brought in some modern perspectives in terms of thinking about what's being said there 500 years ago. So, and particularly with regard to Kali Yuga. And I've said a number of things, and it's along the lines of how I'm speaking now, but I don't think that I think what we have to be focused on is the sense of urgency that the texts like the Bhagavatam or the Chaitanya Charitamrita are trying to bring to bear on us, that we might, as a result of this, be inspired and compelled to take up practice. That this is a rare time. This is an overall an inauspicious time. It's hard to argue that this is a time of hypocrisy and unqualified leadership and so forth. That's fairly obvious to us. And then an auspicious thing has happened nonetheless, and that being the advent and dispensation and the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which are arguably a very deep insight into the subjective world. Not that other traditions don't give us some view into that, but the penetration into it that is spoken about in Chaitanya Charitamrita is really unmatched. The inner kind of workings of the romantic heart of the Absolute, if you will, in play, in Leela. And that's become available, that insight, at this time, which is otherwise inauspicious. This contrast is extraordinary, and so take advantage of this time now. And so that is the real focus of, he's the Kali Yuga avatar, it's the Kali Yuga, and this is a special dispensation within this particular Kali Yuga, and so on and so forth. So I would kind of like draw from the teaching about the yugas, this point is the real emphasis. Otherwise, details about the yuga cycles and what their implication is and who was the avatar in a different yuga, and it's not as really so important, so vital to us. These are things that are borrowed in the Bhagavatam. There are many things that are borrowed from the greater Puranic perspective of the time. The whole view of nature and the world, the objective world, is borrowed entirely from the Sankhya philosophy, as it is in Buddhist philosophy. Buddhists borrow from the Sankhya philosophy. It was the prevailing perspective on the nature of nature. And so it's incorporated into the Bhagavatam, as some other things are, like the Yuga cycles. They're talked about prior to the Bhagavatam in different Puranas, and I think there's might be the original reference to that cyclical time. That's very Eastern, and that has, if you will, some scientific credibility in present times. That's kind of the bigger picture, cyclical time rather than linear time. And that's very, very interesting. But the actual literal cycles, Satyuga, it lasted this long. You can find different descriptions in different Puranas. The Bhagavatam took it in a particular way and used it then to present with a very sense of urgency, you know, this is the Kali Yuga. Take advantage of this text, the Bhagavatam. But what are we to take advantage of? You know, the essence of the teaching, and so on and so forth. To pay attention in the times in which we live, you know, right now. And then the Gaudiya is coming and taking the Bhagavatam as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did as the very heart. They've, you know, developed it and explained it more and better than anyone else, because no one else took it as seriously as the Goswamis and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. And so, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, is the Yuga avatar, and, you know, and using that whole Puranic avatar, you know, perspective and locating Chaitanya Mahaprabhu there. But that is rather kind of external in a sense, even though can be made as a big point. It's Kali Yuga, he's the Yuga avatar. That kind of teaching and emphasis would be more compelling to a person in those times, when there weren't other perspectives about time and the natural world and so forth that were derived from a more intense investigation of the objective world, bringing up certain data and so forth. Of course, largely at the cost of the subjective world. And the idea that there's even a mind that's different from a brain, what to speak of an Atma and a God and a whole world. So there's a great loss in that, you know, search for truth and reality that is so focused on the objective world as to dismiss the reality of the subjective world where everything really goes on. All happiness and sadness goes on in the subjective world. I mean, the quasi-subjective world, the mind, energized by the touch of consciousness proper and so forth. So you know, people say, well, why should I believe in God or the Atma? You know, why should, it's like, to take it further, why should I give credence to the subjective world? Well, because you have experience of it, and it's the realm of experience. I mean, we experience that life has a subjective and an objective component. Why should I dismiss one? Why should I try to collapse one into the other? And if I'm going to, there's reason to conclude that it would be more sensible to collapse the objective world into the subjective world. But anyway, that's, you know, I'm just extending the discussion a bit. So yeah, there are times when Prabhupada sought to kind of ground his disciples, and speaking to novices, to neophytes, whose credence would be, faith would be fostered, at least for some time, by an objective sense of proving and demonstrating the reality of Krishna, and to do so dismiss the other currents of thought that, you know, contradict with it. Rascals, fools, you know, what do they know? And there's some truth to that. Fools, what do they know? and their method and so forth. But, you know, that's not the whole story either. So if you can get grounded in your faith enough to practice, and practice seriously and intensely, as bhakti, that's what it's for. If you want to give up the path of this or that or the other thing and take to bhakti, well, it's a whole lifestyle. It's really doing everything that I do for Krishna. Easier said than done, but as much as one can do that, well, not only everything I do for Krishna, that would be like arup siddha bhakti, or, you know, if everything I do Krishna's work only, not my work, give it to Krishna. That has some value, obviously, and we can get something from that, but hearing, chanting, worshiping the deity, this is bhakti inherently. This Sarup Siddha Bhakti has real power. And so to come entirely under Sarup Siddha Bhakti, you're going to get a powerful result from that. So if somehow or other one can gather a person's faith enough to drive them to practice and to get experience, then with that experience, these types of things are not, these types of arguments are not as much of an obstacle. I don't say that you don't have any experience, obviously you do, but you have enough to nod your head and agree with what I'm saying and understand it and so forth, I believe. And that's good, rather than resistance to it because it's not literally exactly the way, I heard it before or said from some devotees. Teaching is also according to time and circumstance. Prabhupada was trying to ground people in a certain way, and that's so that as a result, they would be, as I said, driven to practice and get experience, and then they're supposed to have a spiritual intelligence to think about things and put into perspective. For example, in the Bhagavatam, what's essential, what's non-essential, what's really important, and so forth. So I wouldn't think that the such conflicts, if you will, those conflicts between modern perspective on time, on history, human history, right, and what the Bhagavatam says, in one sense, they're not even competing narratives, because the Bhagavatam is just talking about the world in an entirely different way. The whole way that it talks about the material world is only for the purpose of compelling one to take up the practice by which it will be transcended. So it's not going into all details of everything, exactly how it works and so forth. It takes the time, the perspective of the time, uses it, and talks about it only really from the perspective of to compel us how to transcend it. And so, if you want to look at the material world from a modern scientific perspective and how matter is like just going on like a machine, it doesn't really contradict our perspective at all. Anyway, so I wouldn't be troubled if I were you to the need to take that literally. As far as works like Michael Cremos and so forth, that's an example of someone driven by a necessity to prove the super subjective reality through objective evidence. That's a failed, mission. I mean, I don't find his work to be. I think it lacks intellectual integrity, and it's somewhat conspiratorial and overall. And so. And again, I mean, he's a nice enough person, but what he's done is taken Prabhupada's statements along those lines literally, and doesn't feel that he has the flexibility to look at them differently, and to see that the literal emphasis of Prabhupada was more of a time and circumstance emphasis than not. There's a famous letter, and I'll end with this, that Prabhupada wrote to a student named Krishnadas, who years ago was troubled by similar, what would appear to be conflicts between what the Bhagavatam describes about relative things and nature and so forth, and modern science. And Prabhupada said, then look at it, the Bhagavatam just metaphorically in that regard, and chant Hare Krishna. And, you don't have to, be troubled by that and so forth. So, I mean, so the flexibility that he showed with a student who brought it up to him is important. And a lot of disciples of Prabhupada, they don't seem to be able to. They're kind of afraid to do anything other than take Prabhupada literally, which is a kind of a unfortunate at this time, after so many years, it kind of holds them in kind of many of them in a kind of a kanishta or neophyte kind of status. In other words, Prabhupada talked about things like, in a lot of ways, said, stop thinking. Okay, because what are my thoughts about, But when I met Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, who Prabhupada advised me to go to, he said, now you have to start thinking about all the things that he put in you and the implications of them and different time and circumstance. So there's a way to think spiritually, right? Mm-hmm.
I see.
And there's a point where not thinking just yes, accept it literally. So how do you think spiritually and land on your feet? And you're going to need some guidance with that. I appreciate your question. I hope I have been able to afford some guidance with regard to this this topic in general.
Oh yes, that was very, very yeah, that made a lot of sense. I really appreciate that, Maharaj. That's
Okay.
that helped a lot.
Nice to make your acquaintance.
Krishna Chaitanya, would you like to ask your question? Unmute.
Hare Krishna. Am I coming through? Good morning. I have a question. I heard on a talk, I think it was a walk maybe, you were discussing a particular devotee who had a particular type of Radha Dasyam. I don't remember the details of how that particular devotee was so inclined towards Radha, but the point that stuck out in my mind that I was curious about was that you said that you thought that maybe that devotee didn't actually have that mood, but was quite influenced by a very influential Vaishnava in their life. And I was just wondering about this idea of someone being influenced by a devotee in their life and not being aware of that influence and what the implications that may be. If that is at all clear.
It's not that clear, but I think that there is certainly a possibility, strong possibility, if not that being the norm, that will be influenced by a particular Vaishnava in ways that are apparent, visible and obvious and so forth, and will change the trajectory of our life and so on, while at the same time, there are ways that we're simultaneously being influenced by that Vaishnava that we don't realize, but that will come to pass in time as we progress. So that's very, very understandable. Again, I don't remember the conversation, and you don't either that well. So I don't know what more I can say about that, but I wouldn't. It's certainly not anything to be worried about or concerned about, and it can only be for our good. However, we're influenced by sadhus, great saints, and so forth. I mean, I guess to go on a little bit, sadhus are driven by spiritual emotion, and the emotive aspect of bhakti is something that doesn't really fully kick in, if you will, until we enter bhakti proper, which would be bhava bhakti. Whereas in sadhana bhakti or bhakti in practice, it's more of a going through the motions and performing the limbs of bhakti, hearing and chanting and so forth, out of just being inspired by an example and by philosophical understanding. And so the emotive components, I say, of bhakti is not active at that time. But meanwhile, the devotee who's teaching us and so forth is under that emotive influence as well, and ideally, and is doing the same things, but driven more by emotion than by out of a sense of duty or just a philosophical sense of the importance of such engagement and so forth. And so typically then that would be the same emotional influence that we would develop in due course. And so as sadhana bhakti becomes perfected in terms, and we graduate from it into bhava bhakti, then there's and in the higher stages of sadhana as well, then there's more of an understanding of the guru's inner life and the prominent sadhu in our life, his inner life, and our connection with that. Typically, of course, that means madhurya rasa, or romantic love for Krishna, a particular type of romantic love in which there's not really a desire to have direct union with Krishna, but to unify Radha and Krishna. And that's the dominant emotion amongst our acharyas and in the literature, and so on and so forth. For good reason, because that's what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to experience. He can experience the bhava of Radha, the experience of himself through her eyes, and through her heart, and so forth. And so there's a way to get as close to the experience of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he sought, that Krishna is seeking as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that is this particular type of Madhurya Rasa. We call it Bhavalasa or Manjari Bhav, and so forth. That's the dominant influence. Of course, there's the supportive influence, and I refer to it as such, of Sakya-rasa because of how supportive Nityananda Prabhu, who was driven by that, being Balaram and Krishna's best friend and brother in Krishna Lila, how supportive he was of Mahaprabhu's pursuit of Madhurya Rasa, and actively and energetically involved in pointing that out to people. Whereas as Balaram in Krishna Lila, he can't do that directly. So as Nityananda Prabhu in Gaur Lila, he had the opportunity to directly participate in this sense in Madhurya Rasa by giving it to the world, pointing to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in the context of that, of course, obviously he was assisted by his own Sakya-rasa assistants, the Gopals, and so that influence is there also in Gaudiya Sampradaya. So those would be, examples of the emotional content that we're going to be influenced by without realizing it at a certain point, and later it'll be realized. It's possible also in some cases that the prominent sadhu in our life, in this life, may be under the influence of Madhurya Rasa, for example, or by Sakya Rasa, or vice versa, whereas the student may be of another, the opposite. That's possibly previous lives and any number of other circumstances. But it will all have impact on our eternal life in the Leela. Even if our due to any number of reasons, basically influences, is in the direction of Madhurya Rasa, the Sakya Rasa Guru. It's prominent. There's a reason for that, and it will play itself out also in our participation in the Leela, ultimately. So I realize I kind of expanded upon what you were asking for, but I hope that helps.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay, Pranada, do you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Thank you for the book you sent me recently.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
The margins weren't done well, but overall it was a huge project of love, huh?
Yeah.
Krishna sends Uddhava to Vrindavan to pacify his parents and the gopis, but no mention is made of the gopas at that time, both in Bhagavatam itself and in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. And I'm wondering what the reason is for that. What's happening there?
Well, first of all, it's typical that in the context of the burden of the Saka's own separation from Krishna, to some extent, the burden of the separation of those in Madhurya Ras and Dasya Ras and Vatsalya Ras. Well, such is the nature of friends. So, for example, when Krishna decided to remain on in Mathura rather than returning for different reasons, then he turned to his friends, Sridham, Subal, and gave them letters, messages to give to his parents and Mother Yasoda, that is, and the gopis respectively, and to advise them and to be a force, as I say, in the context of their own separation of Krishna, which is now impending. They had to leave, mitigate to some extent the feelings of separation of those in the Ras and Madhurya Ras, Sridham, as I said, and Subal respectively. And Nanda Maharaj asked, well, what about the capital? You know, who will pacify them? And Krishna said, well, he said that, he told his friends how to mitigate their separation to some extent as well, to disguise himself as himself and mirror his sins on their bodies, and then the cows would think that.
You're fading in a little bit, in and out a little bit.
Well, anyway, so the point is that that's the role of Sakiras to some extent. So this is an extension of an answer to your question. And so then to carry that further, when Krishna sent, at least prominently, as showcased in the Bhagavatam, messengers back to pacify the inhabitants, he chose Uddhava and later he chose Balaram. Uddhava, Dasya, but his Dasya is mixed with Sakirasa. When he goes to Braj, then the Sakirasa aspect of Uddhava will come more to the front, and there will be a further extension then of his Sthayi Bhav that reaches beyond the range that Dasya Rasa would allow due to the influence of Sakirasa. So it's kind of the Sakya in Uddhava that Krishna appeals to, and again, then Sakirasa here becomes, we have an instance in which it becomes an influence to pacify the separation of others in other rasas. And then Balaram, of course, is in Sakirasa, and Krishna sends him back, and he pacifies as well. So again, this is the role, to some extent, of Sakirasa. Mm-hmm. As to the Bhagavatam's description of Uddhava's messages, yes, it speaks about him meeting with Nanda and Yasoda, and then it speaks about him meeting with the gopis. It doesn't speak about him meeting with the gopis, but it doesn't mean that he didn't meet with the gopis. He didn't talk to them. Sukadev glosses over that. When Balaram comes, then of course in the extended commentaries and so forth, then he speaks with the gopas as well. So I wouldn't take that to be significant, as if to say there was no concern for their Sakiras. But overall, again, the message is Sakiras is in the context of its own separation. This is the work of friends, to help others in their separation. But certainly, Uddhava also met with them. Balaram met with them. And I think you'll you'll find, at least with the Radha Balaram, played out a little bit more and works like Gopal Champu, and so forth. The Bhagavatam's kind of cutting to the chase, if you will, and the real main emphasis, for that matter, of Uddhava's message to Vrindavan is that which is delivered to the gopis, and Madhurya Rasa, and so forth. That's its main emphasis. So, does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have one more question, but before that question, I just wanted to again announce that next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we will be having a Japa weekend with talks by Padmanabha Swami, and our Guru Maharaj will also be speaking on Sunday at this time, a special talk on Japa, and we're all excited that he's going to be able to participate. So the schedule will be coming out this afternoon or this evening, and we'll send out a reminder towards the middle and end of the week. But we would like, as many of you to participate as possible. Really a nice opportunity to have Padmanabha Swami stranded in North Carolina right now and nothing else to do but to spend time with us. And looks like our Guru Maharaj is also in a similar situation, so we'll take advantage of that. So Padmanabha Swami, would you like to ask your question?
Okay. Jai Guru Maharaj, Pranam. And I was wondering a little bit about the the mood of Gadadhar Pandit serving Mahaprabhu in Nitya Navadvip, in the sense that generally we heard of him in his mood of Radha giving her bhav to Gaur in the Bhoma Lila, with Mahaprabhu coming to taste Radha bhav. But in the Nitya Lila, in the Nitya Navadvip, generally there's not that emphasis on Mahaprabhu tasting Radha bhav as like the main purpose for his descent here. So which will be the role, if you will, of Gadadhar Pandit in the Nitya Navadvip, since Mahaprabhu is not that committed to be successful in this main reason for his descent here?
Well, in the Prakat Leela course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu leaves Navadvip and goes to Jagannath Puri, and there his he is then as a sannyasi teaching by his example, and so yes, he's trying to step into the bhav of Radha and so forth, and Gadadhar Pandit is there to assist him. But in the Navadvip Leela, it's not that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu doesn't taste Radha bhava, he does, I guess we've talked about how we would want to look at the Prakat Leela is like, what the Prakat Leela is of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was showcasing is like it's kind of like, I sometimes talk about it as a trailer, to the whole movie. So it's like, this is what Gaur Leela, the Nitya Leela, the unmanifest Leela is all about. It's about that moment and the extension of that moment of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of Krishna, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were tasting Radha bhav. And so there's a whole climax and build up and how it happens, and in the Prakat Leela, step by step, and so which helps us to walk through it as well, following his example. While the Madhya Leela and Mahaprabhu Sannyas is all a teaching Leela, and his Antya Leela as well, the Navadvip Leela, there's some teaching there, obviously, but it's the Leela to attain. So Mahaprabhu is not trying to attain Radha bhav there, he's in Radha bhav there. And Gadadhar is there as well, and celebrating that along with him. So I think you have to look at Gadadhar as Radha in a different Leela. And in that Leela, Krishna's there, and Krishna's going in and out seamlessly to her mood. When in meditation and hearing the Leela Kirtan of Sarup Damodar at his house in the early hours of the evening and late afternoon, Mahaprabhu hears something sung by Sarup Damodar Leela Kirtan, and then he lets out a roar and takes off for the evening to Srivas Angam. And when he goes from his house to Srivas Angam, it corresponds with Krishna leaving his house in secret out the back window. Of course, Mahaprabhu doesn't have to go out the back window because he's going out for Sankirtan. It's a religious activity. Krishna's going out for an apparently irreligious activity, so it has to be secret. But he's going out to meet Radha. Of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu now is turned into Radha, so to speak. So it's Radha going out to meet Krishna, which is also a irreligious activity. But in the context of the Gaur Leela, it's a religious activity. It's Nam Sankirtan. Who can complain if your son wants to go to Kirtan at one of the elders in the community's homes, the home being Srivas Thakur. So Mahaprabhu is in the bhav of Radha, going out to secretly meet with Krishna, so to speak, internally. But externally, Gadadhar is there as his lifelong friend and companion and so forth, and functioning in Gaur Leela as he does otherwise in Navadvip. And internally, when Mahaprabhu is in, for example, Srivas Angam experiencing Rasa Leela, then he experiences it internally as well. So I think that, between the Prakat Leela and the Aprakat Leela, between the manifest and the unmanifest Leela, there's less of a teaching going on that we see that Gadadhar Pandit is part of. Of course, he's also giving Bhagavatam class in the unmanifest Leela and so on and so forth. But again, this manifest Leela is like taking that reality of the Nitya Leela and playing out, like he's becoming Radha. It's a big drama, that one moment, so to speak, that he's actually always absorbed in. In other words, always absorbed whenever the Leela, the Kirtan, the meditation, and so forth becomes deep. That's where he finds himself. It's a Leela still of sadhakas, apparent sadhakas, who are siddhas. So Gadadhar is also a sadhaka in that Leela, but he's not as let's say overtly teaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, either directly or indirectly, as he is in the Prakat Leela. Does that help?
Yes, Gurmaharaj. And one little thing regarding that, because generally you mentioned that in the Prakat Leelas, Mahaprabhu is tasting Radha more and more. Gadadhar disappears, recedes to the background, because his presence next to Mahaprabhu will remind Mahaprabhu that Radha is someone else, if you will. So how this will play out in the Nitya Leela, where you say Mahaprabhu is mostly, he has not to attain Radha, but he's there. But also Gadadhar will be there day after day. So his presence in this case will, if you will, remind Mahaprabhu that.
No, I think it's a little poetic, but I mean, it's like, okay, he gets out of the way for the teaching. Mahaprabhu is successful. Then does he disappear forever? No, now he's successful. He's in Radha Bhava. So the mission accomplished. Now Gadadhar is going to be back in the scene. The mission is accomplished. And he's back in the scene not to teach or give his bhav. When we say give his bhav, now he's zero. It doesn't mean he actually lost his bhav. That's a poetic, kind of way of expressing it that Pujapat Sridhar Maharshi used to use. What he's saying when he's zero, it means that he's taking a negative position. He's giving, not taking. He's just giving. But he has unlimited to give. Radha is going to give Radha. It's not like I get, some yogi gives his Shakti to somebody else and then he collapses. That's, something else. If it's Om Purnamada Purnamidam. So if Radha gives her Shakti entirely to someone, there's no limit to it. So it's not that she collapses and becomes, so in a poetic sense, she in the Prakat Lila, he's getting out of the way, he's receding to the background. He receding to the background says that Radha Bhava is coming into Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When he fully is in that Bhava, Gadadhar is also present there then in the Nitya Lila. But he's Radha in a particular space, if you will, for that particular Lila. Does that help? Kind of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, nice to talk with you all. Hope to be. I look forward to the Nam. I've never been to a japa retreat, so I appreciate the invitation from Kishore. Krishna actually organized it in Archon City. Was thoughtful enough to invite me to participate. I think I will talk a little bit, just say that in advance, because Maharaj will probably be preparing some kind of talks or talk. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the mantra and that we chant, and as a starting point. So
Well, we look forward to it, and hope everybody stays healthy and well, as well as can be in this situation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Kalachandra. Hare Krishna. Okay. Hare Bol.